Every night, the same small candle flickered in the widow's window, glowing against the dark like a silent signal meant for someone far away. The town slept, yet she stayed awake, guarding that fragile flame as if it carried a secret too heavy to share. Neighbors whispered that she was remembering her lost husband, but no one truly knew the promise hidden behind her steady ritual. One evening, a lonely cowboy rode past and noticed the light refusing to die even in the cold wind. Something about it felt personal, almost like the candle was calling him closer. He slowed his horse, unable to look away, wondering who she missed so deeply that she challenged the darkness every single night, without fail, and the quiet mystery began to settle inside his heart, making him feel that this light was not only about loss, but also about unfinished love and hope. She lived alone in a small, quiet house at the far edge of town, where dust roads ended and silence began. People passed by politely, yet never stayed because her eyes held stories she never told. Everyone knew she was a widow, but she spoke to no one about the man she lost or the life that disappeared with him. Each evening she closed her door, lit the candle, and sat beside the window as if waiting for footsteps that never came. The passing cowboy noticed the same ritual night after night, and the steady glow unsettled him more than darkness. He felt that the house was not empty, but filled with memories breathing softly in every corner. The mystery of her silence followed him on every ride, growing heavier, as though the candle was guarding a truth that would change both their lonely lives forever, without either understanding why the feeling stayed with him as he rode away that night, yet it did not fade. Instead, it followed him like a quiet whisper that asked questions he could not ignore. He began slowing his horse earlier each evening, hoping to see if the candle would ever fail to appear. But the small flame always returned steady, patient, and strangely alive against the dark horizon. Curiosity slowly turned into concern because no heart could hold such devotion without carrying deep sorrow. He imagined the widow sitting by the window counting memories instead of hours and guarding a love that time refused to erase. One cold evening the wind grew harsh and clouds swallowed the moon, making the road feel longer and lonelier than usual. He expected the window to be dark at last, yet the candle still burned, trembling but determined, as if it feared being forgotten. A strange ache rose inside him, and he realized he was no longer passing by out of chance, but out of a need he could not explain. He wondered whether she waited for footsteps that would never reach the door, or if she simply refused to accept that goodbye had already happened. The candle now looked less like a memory and more like a promise she protected from the cruelty of silence. Night after night, he carried this question with him, feeling that the answer was hidden behind her calm face and closed door. Sleep became restless because the image of that fragile light stayed in his mind like an unfinished story asking to be heard. He knew that one day he would have to stop and face the truth glowing in that window, even if it changed something inside him forever. Until then, the ride past her house felt less like a routine and more like a silent conversation between two wounded souls. He never spoke her name, yet his heart greeted that candle as if it recognized the language of loss and quiet endurance. The mystery tightened around him gently, pulling him closer each passing evening, while the town remained unaware of the invisible thread forming between rider and widow. He sensed that breaking this silence would reveal a pain as deep as the night sky, yet leaving it untouched felt equally unbearable. So he kept watching from a distance, carrying the weight of questions that grew heavier with every flicker of that stubborn flame. Deep inside, he understood that the candle was not merely light, but a vow she had made to love beyond absence and beyond time. And the more he realized this, the more he feared what truth might surface when silence finally broke between them. The road ahead seemed uncertain, yet his path now felt tied to that glowing window by an unseen destiny. He knew the next encounter would not be simple curiosity, but a moment that could uncover the hidden story guarding her lonely heart and change his life forever in ways he never expected. At last the night arrived when silence could no longer hold him back. Dark clouds gathered and rain began to fall, turning the road into a ribbon of shadow and echoing drops. He felt that if he rode past once more he would carry the question forever, so he stopped before the glowing window and dismounted slowly. His boots touched the wet ground with hesitation, yet his eyes remained fixed on the steady flame that refused to surrender to the storm. He walked to the door and knocked softly, fearing he might break something fragile inside her quiet world. The widow opened the door after a pause, surprise flickering across her tired face as she saw the cowboy standing there drenched and silent. For a moment neither spoke, and the candle behind her painted trembling light between them like a living memory waiting to be named. He finally asked about the candle in a gentle voice that carried more respect than curiosity, as if he already sensed the answer would hurt. Her lips quivered and her gaze drifted toward the flame, and tears slowly gathered without sound. She stepped aside and allowed him to enter, not as a stranger, but as someone who had witnessed her ritual long enough to understand its weight. When she spoke, her voice was soft yet firm, explaining that the candle was for her husband who left for war many years ago and never returned to the door he promised to cross again. She said no letter confirmed his death and no grave carried his name. So the light became her way of guiding him home through endless darkness. The cowboy listened without moving, feeling each word settle deeply into his chest, like falling rain that could not be brushed away. She confessed that people advised her to accept loss and extinguish the flame, yet her heart refused because love without hope felt colder than widowhood itself. As long as the candle burned, she believed his memory would stay alive and his path back to her would never disappear completely. The storm outside grew louder, but inside the small room the fragile glow seemed stronger, holding years of loyalty and unanswered longing within its tiny circle. The cowboy realized that he was not witnessing a habit, but a living promise that time had failed to erase, and the truth touched him more deeply than he expected. In that quiet moment, he understood that her candle was not waiting for a man alone, but protecting the part of her soul that still believed love could outlast absence. And this realization filled him with both sorrow and admiration, because he knew such faith demanded strength few people possessed. He stood beside the flickering light, feeling that her vigil had silently changed the course of his own wandering life forever. And in that shared silence, he sensed that their stories were now gently connected by the fragile flame, promising that neither of them would face darkness alone again. He left her house that night with the sound of her quiet confession echoing inside him, and the rain felt colder than before because he now understood the depth of the loneliness she carried every single evening. As he rode away, he realized that his own life had been shaped by long stretches of silence too, years spent moving from place to place without roots, without anyone waiting for him at a window. Her devotion to a memory made him question the emptiness he had accepted as normal, and for the first time he felt a gentle desire to protect something fragile rather than escape from it. The next evening he passed her house again, but did not knock. Instead, he placed a small bunch of wildflowers by her door and rode away before the sound of his horse could announce his presence. He told himself it was only a simple gesture, yet his heart felt lighter, as if he had shared a quiet part of her burden without disturbing her sacred ritual. Morning came, and she opened the door to find the flowers resting there, fresh and silent, and confusion touched her eyes because no one had ever noticed her loneliness with such care. She looked around, but the road was empty, leaving only the soft fragrance of kindness behind. That evening the candle burned as always, yet something had changed in the room because hope now breathed gently beside the flame. Night after night, the cowboy continued this secret offering, sometimes leaving flowers, sometimes a small ribbon or a smooth stone shaped by the river, never signing his name and never asking for gratitude. She began to wait for these mysterious tokens as much as she waited for the candle to glow, feeling that somewhere in the vast quiet world a heart understood hers without demanding anything in return. The gifts were simple, yet they spoke a language deeper than words, reminding her that her vigil was seen and respected rather than pitted. Slowly the heaviness in her chest softened, and her steps around the house became less tired as though unseen companionship walked beside her through the long evenings. The cowboy watched from a distance each time, ensuring she never felt observed or obligated, because he feared that revealing himself too soon might break the fragile peace growing around her sorrow. His loneliness no longer felt like an endless road because it now carried purpose, guiding him back to that glowing window where resilience and remembrance lived together. Without speaking, they began to share a quiet bond shaped by patience, respect, and the understanding that some wounds heal not through grand promises, but through small, consistent acts of care. And with each passing night, the distance between their solitary lives grew thinner, replaced by a silent warmth that neither fully understood, yet both deeply felt. The silent warmth that had been growing between them suddenly faced its harshest test one restless evening, when the sky darkened earlier than usual and the wind began to circle the small house with an uneasy howl. She prepared to light the candle as always, yet the storm pushed against the window with unusual force, shaking the glass and making her hands tremble. She struck the match and guarded the flame carefully, but a sudden gust slipped through a narrow crack and blew the candle out before it could settle into a steady glow. For a moment she froze, staring at the thin line of smoke rising into darkness, and a wave of fear rushed through her chest. Years of unwavering devotion felt as if they had collapsed in a single breath, and she sank into the chair believing she had broken the promise that kept her husband's memory alive. Tears flowed without restraint as thunder rolled outside, echoing the storm now raging inside her heart. She whispered apologies to the silence, convinced that the extinguished light meant she had finally failed the love she protected for so long. Just then a gentle knock sounded on the door, almost lost beneath the roar of wind, yet clear enough to reach her fragile hope. She hesitated, unsure whether she was strong enough to face anyone, but the knock came again, patient and respectful. When she opened the door, she found the cowboy standing there, holding a lantern that glowed steadily despite the storm. Rain covered his coat, yet his eyes held calm understanding rather than surprise. He did not speak loudly or offer dramatic comfort. Instead, he extended the lantern toward her and said softly that memories do not live inside fragile flames, but inside faithful hearts that refuse to forget. His quiet words settled around her like shelter, and she realized that the promise she feared losing had never depended on a single candle. The lantern light filled the room with a warm, steady glow, stronger than the small flame she guarded for years, and she felt something inside her begin to release the tight grip of fear. For the first time, she allowed someone to witness her sorrow without shame, and the storm outside slowly lost its power over her trembling spirit. She stepped aside and let him place the lantern near the window where the candle used to stand, watching how the steady glow replaced the darkness that had terrified her moments earlier. The simple act did not erase her grief, yet it showed her that devotion could survive even when rituals failed. He remained quiet, giving her space to breathe, and in that silence she felt the weight of years begin to soften for the first time. She realized that the promise was alive not because of a flame, but because her love still endured through every storm, and the presence of the cowboy made that endurance feel shared rather than painfully solitary forever. From that night, she stood by the window, holding the lantern's glow as if it were a living promise that could not be taken away again. She understood that love had not been waiting in the flame, but resting quietly inside her faithful heart. The fear of breaking her vow faded, replaced by calm strength she never knew she carried. When he turned to leave, she did not call him back, yet her eyes thanked him for sharing the long night of silence. The candle burned beside the lantern, no longer guarding loss alone, but welcoming gentle hope. As he rode under the quiet moon, she felt her grief loosen its hold and her future finally begin to breathe with light. She whispered a soft goodbye to the past and a brave hello to the life still waiting beyond the window. And for the first time, peace stayed after the night ended softly.